The number one way that core contracts derail mergers is termination expense. Bankers do not realize or do not think in advance of the implications of eliminating a relationship with their vendor in the middle because they're doing a merger. These contracts can cost them 70, 80, 90, 100% of the remaining value of that contract has to be paid at the merger. And not only that, the vendors will require that the bank pay that money in advance if they even are ready to convert their data. So in a sense, they hold the merger hostage. If you're not willing to pay that money, you're not going to get your data file and you can't do a merger. And so the problem is that by the time that information is made available, it's too late. We get called once a month, many times a year, from investment bankers and lawyers and banks themselves asking, can we do anything to negotiate these termination expense? I said, once your vendor knows there's a merger, all your leverage is gone. So what we advise banks to do is proactively, in advance, years in advance, if merger is in your future, you should pre-stipulate these things and get these termination expenses softened or changed or adjusted or whatever it might be, so you don't have this huge expense at the end. And again, it does derail deals. It's very unfortunate when you see it. When someone has a $1.4 or $2 million termination expense, it's very hard to swallow that in a merger. There are a lot of things that a bank that's considering selling itself can do to mitigate a lot of these big problems in these core contracts. The first one is kind of a negotiating 101, which is don't signal to your vendor what your intentions are. And what I mean by that is a lot of banks think, if I'm going to sell myself in the next few years, I don't want to get into a 5-year contract or a 7-year contract because I want to avoid those termination expenses. So what they do is they go to their vendor and they ask them for a 3-year deal. But the problem is, what they don't realize, when they ask their vendor for a 3-year deal, they automatically know that they're a short-term player. And so that vendor has a right to pull all the benefits off the table, all the incentives off the table, and actually make it very painful for you to exist in a short-term deal, assuming you can get one. So you can get all the economic benefits of a long-term deal with the exposure limitations of a shorter-term deal if you know what to ask for. It's very, very important. Another thing that they can do is they can pre-stipulate in their agreement, let's say that they're a Jack Henry bank and they're acquired by another Jack Henry bank, or they're acquired by a Fiserv or a Fidelity bank, FIS bank. They can pre-stipulate in their agreement what those costs of deconversion are or conversion are in advance. Because if you leave these things to speculation or you leave them to the whims of what's in the agreement, the vendor will take advantage of you at the end of the day, because after all, they're not surviving and they have no incentive to do anything nice for you at the end. So that's why you have to get this stuff in there ahead of time. That's what you really should be doing. Well, if they're thinking about a merger, what they should be doing today is not ignoring that core contract. Very important. Because when banks are thinking about mergers, they get their investment bankers involved, they get their lawyers involved, they get all those folks and consultants involved that help them address the value of the bank and what they could sell it for and who they can sell it to, and that's a big process. But what they forget is these core contracts. And again, these are multi-million-dollar deals that are material on every single transaction. So to be proactive, what you do is you pull those agreements off the shelf. You probably haven't looked at them in many years. Get some outside help. Get an expert, get a consultant, not necessarily an attorney because they don't have the data or the inside market intelligence. Give it to them so they can do what we call a merger readiness assessment. And essentially, when we're approached by banks to do that, we go through their agreement and we say, all right, here are the issues in your contract that are going to affect your merger. This is going to be expensive if this lives. This is going to affect you if it doesn't live. There are things missing that we should put in. These are economic structures that should be modified, so that if M&A is in your strategy, the key is you want to get that agreement in alignment with the bank's strategy. Because right now, chances are it's in alignment with the vendor strategy, and that helps nobody but them. So you do this merger readiness assessment, you restructure the agreement, working with your supplier to get the terms in there that you want, and if you know what to ask for, you can do it. And then you can comfortably move forward in your merger strategy, knowing that agreement is not going to show up at the last minute and really, bite you in the tail because you didn't address it in the first place. Buy or sell, that's what you should be doing. It has to be a fiduciary responsibility. I mean, you have to do this if you're thinking about M&A in the future.